Well, hello, Nativity Bible Heads. It is Dr. Wayne, and this is your Bible Study Wednesday special Lenten March edition. Yes, there are 5 Wednesdays in March. The last Wednesday is in Holy Week. So the first 4 Wednesdays, we are going to be covering the 9 texts that are prescribed for the Great Vigil of Easter. We're not actually having a Great Vigil of Easter this year at Nativity. We didn't have one last year either. But I thought that shouldn't deprive us from getting the wisdom of the word of those texts. And for all of you First Kings fans, we will resume First Kings again after Easter. I do like teaching that. But the texts of the Great Vigil of Easter are, by the way, when the service is actually done, the Book of Common Prayer tells us exactly what it's supposed to be like. And there are 9, like I said, there are 9 texts, right? There's like stuff from Genesis, there's stuff from Exodus, there's stuff from Jeremiah, Isaiah, Zephaniah, Ezekiel. Yeah. It is intended to answer the question, wow, how did we get here? What has happened that had us get here? So the 9 texts, not all 9 of them have to be read liturgically. There's only like a minimum of like 2 or 3, something like that. And one of them has to be the Red Sea narrative, which will be next Wednesday, March the 10th. Anyway, tonight is the first 2 of those 9 Great Vigil of Easter passages. The story of creation from Genesis 1 and the flood in Genesis 7, 8, 9. We're not going to read all of 7, 8, 9. We're just going to read a thing. So if you have your Bibles, I wish I could figure out a way to get the text to show up on the screen. I know that the person who does that for our Sunday worship, they know how to do those things. I haven't figured out how to do that yet. Maybe I will in time. So hopefully, right? I'm going to read this to you nonstop as far as, okay, the story of creation. I'm not going to stop like I normally do and like, oh, here's a thought about this and here's a teaching about that. No, I'm going to read the whole story from beginning to end, story of creation, which is Genesis 1, verse 1 to Genesis 2, verse 2. Okay? I'm going to read the whole thing, and then I'm going to go back and talk about it. And then we're going to do the flood narrative. Not the whole thing, but like bits and pieces to it so you get the whole thing. Okay, here we go. The story of creation. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. God called the dome sky. And there was evening and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the sky be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed of every kind, and trees of every kind, bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. And God said, let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let there be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth. And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky. So God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves of every kind with which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle and creeping things, and wild animals of the earth of every kind. And it was so. God made the wild animals of the earth of every kind, and the cattle of every kind, and everything that creeps upon the ground of every kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. God said, see, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the seventh day, God finished the work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. And that's it for our reading. Okay, so this is the creation story. So much to say here, and I'm trying to keep, I got to still teach the thing about the flood. I'm trying to get it all done in 30 to 35 minutes, maybe 40, I don't know, we'll see. Okay, let's start about the beginning. So Genesis 1:1. So when it says, like, in the beginning when God created the heavens and the earth, some translate, it could be translated in the beginning when God began creating the heavens and the earth. It's like the Hebrew text that belies our English translation allows for both ways of understanding it. And neither one of them presumes a creation ex nihilo, which is Latin for out of nothing. But the idea here is that the act of creation is the act of organization. It's not necessarily like a magic, like waving a magic wand and poof, there it is. The idea is that creation takes what's there, the chaos, the bad stuff of life, and turns it into something, that is good. Notice that, okay, so we got to give up something here. And if most of us, I think, who are watching this are on board with this, but I just got to say this. This is not science. It's not intended to be science. It's not intended to contradict science either. The thing that God does on the first day tells us that immediately. Then God said, "Let there be light." We know that light is something that we get from the sun. The moon reflects that light. The stars, they have light themselves, which are other suns, right? God doesn't even create those until the fourth day, but yet light was created on day one. That's our clue right there. You don't go to the book of Genesis for science. You don't go to the book of Genesis for astrophysics. It's just not addressing that. This is a theological description of the way of God. One of the things we got to keep in mind when we are dealing with our scriptures in the Old Testament, our scriptures of the Hebrew Bible, and that is this. The people for whom these stories were fashioned, they were either in exile, fast forward to the 7th century, where they lost the land of promise and they're exiled from the land of promise. They're in Babylon and they have no idea if they're ever getting back. They have no idea if they're ever going to get their religion back. This story is crafted for people in exile, people who have gone through it all, experienced the promise, and lost it. And now they're in Babylon, and they're wondering, I wonder if we'll ever get that back. While they're in Babylon, there are creation stories, there are other gods, there are other creation stories. This creation story is a creation story which is intended to uplift the community in exile and to say, hey, those Babylonian gods got nothing on your God. Yeah, you might not be able to worship in, the way you want with the temple and all that, but you know what? Your God is still the creator of the earth, and your God does it in a way that's different from any tale out there about the way other gods may have done that. Let us continue. On the second day, what was created? The dome. Okay, so the picture of creation is this. There's nothing but watery chaos. Watery chaos, watery chaos, blah, 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 blah. There's no air, there's no light, there's nothing. It's just darkness, it's just chaos. And God creates light in the chaos, and then God creates order in the chaos by erecting a dome, what was called the sky. If you can imagine like a tent, okay? Let's say like God plunged this waterproof tent into the watery chaos. Yeah, flat bottom, dome top, sure, why not? That's the picture that our narrator paints us of what creation looks like. The dome. Waters are still above, waters are still below. Flat with a dome covering, day 2. This is what is being described. On the third day, what happens? Waters are gathered together in one place inside the dome. So now we're inside that dome, and the waters are gathered to one place. Apparently, when the dome was created, there were some waters that were allowed to still be in the dome, right? And so some of the waters are gathered to one place. Oh, and what happens? Oh, well, we have dry land and we have seas. Very good. What happens when you have dry land? You have the ability for vegetation to grow, plants and stuff for food. One of the key things of the creation story is that plants were intended for food. They weren't allowed to actually, there's no talk in the Bible of eating meat for food until after the flood. This isn't a judgment for or against meat or not meat, either way. I'm just pointing out what the narrative tells us. The fourth day, what happens? Let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night. So this is where we are introduced to the two great lights, okay? The greater light to rule the day, that's another word for the sun. The other to rule the night, that's the moon. And the stars. Okay, remember, these people are in exile. Where are they in exile? They're in exile in Babylon. What is going on in Babylon? There's a lot of worship going on of just those things. Sun, moon, stars. And this creation story comes along and says, oh, yeah, yeah, those things that you worship, yeah, our God created that. That's what's going on here. And there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. And then on the fifth day, what happens? Waters bring forth living creatures, and that's when we have this thing about the birds of the air and the sea monsters. I love the sea monsters. Every living creature that moves. They are the first ones that were told to be fruitful and multiply. I think that is hilarious. They weren't nautical people. Remember, they didn't live on the seashore. When Israel was in Israel, the Philistines were there. The Philistines were on the seashore. And so you couldn't really get to the seashore, but there was this belief that, oh, there's these dragons out there, these sea monsters out there. This is the mythical world that they lived in. Okay, we got to go on. Day 6. On day 6, what happens? Okay, so you already had, on day 4, we had, on day 5, we had the fish, the fishies, the creatures of the sea and the creatures of the air. Now we have the creatures of the land, of which is included, it says cattle and yada yada, and humankind. Okay, where it says, then God said, let us make humankind in our image. That word humankind in Hebrew is Adam. Yeah, A-D-A-M. Adam. That's what the Hebrew word is for people. Humankind in our image, according to our likeness. Our? What's this our about? It's probably a reference to the heavenly court, the idea that God is not alone, the idea that God has attending people. Because when you're royalty, you got people. Let them have dominion, birds of the air. Blah, 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 blah. So God created humankind, look at this, in his image. He said, well, let us make humankind in our image. Our image. So God created humankind in his image. You know how there's a prescription in the 10 Commandments about creating an idol or an image of God? Why? Because, we have already been created in God's image. So why would we create an image of God? God's the creator. We were created in God's image. Yeah, that's the reason why that was such a big deal later on. Because why would we create an idol of a God when God has already created us in his image? Why would you do that? Male and female. he created them. The division of the sexes, by the way, the word sexes is from the Latin sectare, which means to separate, to section off, to separate, to sectare, sex, the sexes. There is no division of the sexes in God. That doesn't exist in God. In humanity, that's how it manifests. There's a separation there, the sectare, the sexes. I don't have time to go into that. We're 20 minutes in. I still got to get to the flood. Oh. Okay. God blessed them, and God said, be fruitful and multiply, have dominion. Okay, so humanity is given dominion over what? The fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and every living thing. And he's like, I've given you all these plants for food, and every beast, and to every beast of the earth, and everything that creeps. You know, I've given them all these green plants for food. Remember, this is a very vegetarian kind of a creation story, all right? And it was so. Period. Created them, gave them food. Remember, they don't start eating animals for food till after the flood. And here's where it says, and it was tov ma'od, very good. It was very good. All of it was very good. Nothing sinful about it, nothing bad about it. It's as though God is this master creator saying, this is good, isn't it? This is good. I don't know who he's talking. I don't know who God is talking to here, but it's like God is delighting in it. Have you ever had that experience of creating something artistically and delighting in it? That's the imagery we get of God here. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude, and on the seventh day, God finished the work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. I was watching a comedy special of a comedian, Chris Rock, and he was talking about, you know what? His point, he started out with, God does make mistakes, okay? This is what he was saying. And he's saying, here's how I know God makes mistakes. When you're doing good and you are just on a roll and you everything you're working on in your shop is perfect, you know what you don't do? You don't stop and rest. That's how you know God made mistakes, according to Chris Rock, the comedian. I find a lot of solace in comedy. Anyway, but this is so this thing about resting on the seventh day, the word seventh and Sabbath means the same thing. The idea being that God is setting in motion a rhythm of life, a rhythm of life, a rhythm of life. Those planetary things, the sun, the moon, the stars, that the rest of the world was worshiping as gods. Our writer says, all of those things, they're just so that we can keep track of time. That's it. They're like your stopwatch. They're like your Rolex, whatever. I know they didn't have watches back then, but I want you to get the idea that the intent of the author is to poo-poo, put down the gods of the Babylonians, which is where they were in exile. Okay. We're moving on to the flood. I'm 23 minutes in. I got to get the flood in 10 minutes or maybe 15 at the most. Okay, Genesis 7, 1-5. I'm going to read this throughout. 7, 1-5. I just talked about the flood not that long ago because I think it was one of the readings on Sunday morning. So I might not need to say a whole lot here. So Genesis 7, 1-5, verses 11-18, and then chapter 8, verses 6-18, and chapter 9, verses 8-13. One of the things that our lectionary people did when they put our prayer book together is, and they put the service together with the 9 texts of the Great Vigil of Easter, is that they made it a good contiguous story. It really is a little bit better than what we actually have to cull through when we're in the Bible. So this is the Bible, but we're not reading it continuously. Okay, here we go. The Lord said to Noah, "Go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you alone are righteous before me in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, the male and its mate, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and its mate, and 7 pairs of the birds of the air also, male and female, to keep their kind alive on the face of all the earth." For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. And every living thing that I have made, I will blot out from the face of the ground. And Noah did all that the Lord had commanded him. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth. Remember the dome with the water underneath? Well, sprung a leak. And the windows of the heavens were opened. The rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah, with his sons, Shem and Ham and Japheth, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons, entered the ark, 8 of them. They and every animal of every kind, every wild animal of every kind, and all domestic animals of every kind, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every bird of every kind, every bird, every winged creature. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him. And the Lord shut him in. The flood continued 40 days on the earth, and the waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters swelled and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. Isn't that interesting? At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made and sent out the raven. And it went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. Interesting. Then he sent out the dove from him to see if the waters had subsided from the face of the ground. But the dove found no place to set its foot. And it returned to him to the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. So he put out his hand and took it and brought it into the ark with him. He waited another 7 days, and again he sent out the dove from the ark. And the dove came back to him in that evening, and there in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided from the earth. Then he waited another 7 days and sent out the dove, and it did not return to him anymore. In the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, the waters were dried up from the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked and saw that the face of the ground was drying. In the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. Then God said to Noah, "Go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing that is with you of all flesh, birds and animals, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, so that they may abound on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth." So Noah went out, and his sons and his wives and his wife and his sons' wives. Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, "As for me, I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the domestic animals, and every animal of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. I established my covenant with you that never again shall all flesh be cut off from the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth." God said, "This is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the clouds." What's that? I have set my bow in the clouds. It shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. I love that story. Okay, so I'm trying to tie together how these make a continuous narrative, right? So we just had creation, and then we didn't get it was anything from Genesis chapter 6, which talks about God's motivation in sending the flood. God was upset. God was pissed. He was mad. He was like, these people are really bad. The flood comes as a sign of God saying, oh, it's not, we had creation. Now we have uncreation. Yeah, uncreation. At the end of the flood, when we have the animals procreating and all that, go up and be fruitful and multiply on the earth, we have recreation. So the Genesis story in chapter 1 was creation. The beginning of the flood story is uncreation. And then we have recreation. These stories take place in the milieu whereby it's describing God before, in that time we call prehistory. Everything that happens before God deals with Abraham in Genesis is what we call prehistory. And what we get here isn't so much a definitive picture of who God is every time, all the time. We get God figuring out what he's got on his hands with regard to his creation. Yeah. Notice we didn't have the Adam and Eve story. We didn't have the Garden of Eden. We didn't have the ziggurat and the Tower of Babel. We didn't have there's a lot of stories in Genesis. There was creation, and now here is uncreation. It's like, so God is like getting annoyed with, irritated with, saying, hey, these people, let's just start again. And luckily, he found somebody of Noah. I'm trying to keep this short so I don't detain you too long. In the flood story, what we have is a picture of how God is figuring out how he's going to deal with us. Remember, he hasn't talked yet to Abraham or Moses or anybody after that, right? Is this a picture necessarily about how God is or necessarily was? I don't know. We don't know. But what it does tell us is that God was impacted by our misdeeds to the point that flood was felt to be necessary. The flood, remember, the flood wasn't cleansing. The flood was death. The flood was something that came in. It was like that chaos of creation. All of that chaos from creation, the waters above and below, all of that was let in. That's what the flood was. That the flood was uncreation. And then at the end, God makes a promise. Okay, not going to do this anymore. I'm going to be your God, and I created you, and I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to figure this out. Is this the way God is necessarily? I don't know. I don't know that that's necessarily what we want to take away from this. What we want to take away from this is that we can be thankful that God is so self-aware that he can make a promise and say, I'm not going to be that way with my people anymore. I'm going to be a different way. And in our Christian tradition, it culminates in Jesus. So in the context of the Great Vigil of Easter, these passages, they illustrate things that God did before he called on Abraham. And we're gonna hear that next week. Our God is a faithful God. Our God is a God who learns. Our God is a God who has experimented with ways of being and said, you know what? That doesn't work for me. And by the time he deals with Abraham, he's figured some things out. He's made some promises. Made some promises to us. We can presume that means promises to himself. Does this mean that the scriptures are casting God as us? Because it's like, wow, that sounds a lot like me. That's the way I get sometimes when I'm frustrated or whatever. Well, I don't know. This is prehistory. This is all designed to give us a picture of, remember, these people are in exile that these are written for. Not only did they have creation stories, other creation stories they could listen to, they also had other flood stories. Oh yeah, there were other flood stories. And the difference in this flood story is that God acts out of righteousness. The idea of who God is and who we've become. God isn't just being petty. God isn't just being like, No, God is searching truly for an abiding answer to what's going on. And in the sign of the bow, remember the bow at the end, I don't want us to get this picture of, oh, the pretty rainbow. No, the bow is an instrument of war. The bow and arrow, you know, I have laid my bow in the sky, in the clouds. And when I see it, it will be a reminder. God has disarmed God's self. This is what God has done in order to make a space for us to be a part of divinity. Yes, there's separation. Yes, we are humanity. But as we recognize who the Creator is, this is where we go. This is how the story moves forward. I'm not going to keep you any longer. I've gone 35 minutes, coming up on 36, and I want to make sure that we keep these succinct. But and I did talk about this, taught about it not too long ago, the flood story. But next week we get Abraham and Moses. Blessings on your land.